So Jimmy Carter's foreign policy is definitely something that is much more along the lines of what we think of when we think about President Carter, and the media attention and really what he will be known for will all pretty much be foreign policy related. So I want to hit on his overall foreign policy philosophy and then how that all played out and worked/didn't work. Overall, it's important to remember who Jimmy Carter is. He's very much, and people always say, like, I've heard people say it 1,000 times, like, we should elect someone who just, like, cares about people and loves the planet and wants to do good things and put out good things. And that's basically what we did when we elected Jimmy Carter. He was someone who had some experience, but he wasn't too involved into Washington, so he wouldn't be in all of the, shadiness. And he's genuinely just like a good-hearted, I want to do good things type of person. However, being the leader of the most powerful country in the world, you have to make some tough decisions sometimes, and you have to be willing to make some tough decisions. You have to make some enemies, you have to make some allies, and sometimes you have to make enemies with good guys and allies with bad guys. It's all about playing the game. And this is definitely was a learning experience for the whole country when we figured out that maybe, the nicest guy isn't necessarily the best guy. No matter who you think the best president was out of all 45 that we've had now, I'm confident that whoever you think is the best probably had a little grit to him and wasn't afraid to be, forceful or serious at times, and probably made some enemies along the way. And Jimmy Carter very much didn't want to be that type of president, and unfortunately it will really end up backfiring on him and making him more enemies in the long run. But what he wanted was to make his foreign policy geared more towards human rights. He wanted to protect human rights. He said that the United States basically is putting us back in this role of being the global police, and we want to make sure that our allies are taking care of their citizens, and that even our enemies are taking care of their citizens. And he essentially puts into place this new doctrine that we will not be connected in any way to a country that violates human rights. So this definitely puts a setback to our relationship with the Soviet Union, because if there's one thing the Soviets do, it's violate human rights. And us, after the Ford administration, when we signed some more positively leaning, agreements with them, it seems like maybe the Cold War is definitely in a cool spot, that things are going well. But when Carter begins to make these types of statements, it just ramps up all of those paranoid feelings again. And he ended up withdrawing the United States from the SALT II treaty and began imposing sanctions on the USSR. So the Cold War, while at a brief pause for 2 years, is sort of back on in full swing here. In 1980, the Soviet Union will actually invade Afghanistan in an attempt to set up a communist government there. And out of, anger at them for trying to spread communism, which we know we did not want to do, Jimmy Carter decided that the United States would be boycotting the Summer Olympics in 1980 because they were supposed to be hosted in Moscow. He was like, we will not be sending athletes to Moscow. We're boycotting. No, we're not doing it. And this really made a lot of people angry, because there are athletes who train their entire lives for these athletic games, and a lot of them only get one shot at it. Like, that 1 year's worth of games is their only shot for a lot of them. And I know now the Olympic Games happen every other year, or every 2 years, I mean. We do summer, and then in 2 years we do winter. Well, back then we did summer and winter in the same year, and it was every 4 years. And so a lot of people were saying, there won't be another Olympic Games year for another 4 years. There's not going to be another opportunity for these athletes to compete in any type of athletic event, whether it be summer or winter. So people were really, really angry. And he'll use that same strategy in a million other places, wanting to be this peacemaker. For example, in Nicaragua, we had been supporting and aiding a dictator in Nicaragua who, because he wasn't as bad as the one before him. But Jimmy Carter says, no, that guy sucks. We're not helping him. So he pulls our support out, which allows a rebellion to rise up and overthrow that guy. And we're like, whatever, he wasn't the best guy in the world, but the guy that ends up taking over is worse. And in the rebellion, plenty of innocent people got killed in the process. So not exactly awesome. On top of that, he definitely puts a strain on our relationship with Cuba. Castro begins to announce that any boats leaving Cuba, heading for the United States, must take prisoners with them, meaning he's going to empty out Cuban prisons by dumping his prisoners in America. And Jimmy Carter was just like, okay, well, that's fine. And it wasn't. People were really angry about this. And Jimmy Carter just didn't seem to be a strong enough leader to stop this from happening. Probably one of the most controversial things that Jimmy Carter ever did. In 1977, he drafted a plan to give Panama the control back of the Canal Zone by 1999. It went into effect in 1978. For perspective here, the canal cost the United States a total of $8.6 billion over the years when we were, not only that includes, the construction of it and the upkeep of it, and then the annual rent that we paid to Panama. Remember, we paid Panama every year since it was constructed, or finished construction in 1914. We've paid them every year. And today, the Panama Canal makes $12 million a day. And so this would be a great, financial income, and it would be, a good commerce tool. But nevertheless, Jimmy Carter said, it belongs to the Panamanian people, so we should give it back. The last two major moments in Carter's foreign policy that I want to mention. The first is the conflict between Egypt and Israel. If you remember, during the Suez Crisis, I talked about how Egypt and Israel did not have a good relationship. And that goes back a long, 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 long time, right? They've been fighting long before Israel was technically a country, and since it was created a country in 1948, they've been enemies since then. In 1977, Jimmy Carter thought that he was the man to end this, millennia-old fight, and he could solve a beef that is older than Jesus himself. So he invited the leaders of Israel and the leader of Egypt to come to the United States to Camp David, which is the presidential retreat, to work out an agreement. And they do. They write up basically an agreement between the two of them that Egypt would recognize Israel as a country, making it the first Arab country to do so. And in return, Israel would pull its troops out of the Sinai Peninsula, which is where Jerusalem is, which is, we know, highly coveted land between all of the nations around it. So you can see here in this bottom picture, this is Jimmy Carter with the presidents of Egypt and Israel. He's feeling very proud. You could tell by that smile. They're shaking hands. This is great. So the president of Egypt goes, or the prime minister, I should say, he goes back. Israel, prime minister of Israel. He goes back to Israel. He says that, he signed this document. This is going to be the dawn of a new age in terms of our relationship with these other Arab countries. Like, we're feeling really positive. President of Egypt goes back to Egypt, says the same thing. And his people are not pleased. He ends up being assassinated. And so the Camp David Accords, which was the name of the agreement that they signed, was pretty much out the window, and it looked like a big flop for the Carter administration, and kind of like it got a guy killed. But even more controversial than the Camp David Accords would be the Iranian hostage crisis, which there's a photograph of that up there at the top right. So a little background here. in Iran, the Shah was the leader of Iran. He took over, coming out of World War II. This guy who was called the Shah, Shah, took power in Iran, and we supported him and his westernization of Iran. But in reality, he was a dictator who killed a lot of Iranian people. He began a famine. There are plenty of people who, and he, used all the standard practices of a dictator. He arrested people for speaking out. He censored the media, all of these things. He used the military and really savage tactics to impose his rule. This was not a good dude. But we supported him because he was trading with us. We wanted to protect our all access, and he was trying to westernize Iran, which is something that, as being, the West, we were really in favor of. So, unfortunately for the Shah, in the 70s, he was overthrown. There was a rebellion, and the Shah lost power, and the guy that took power was, his name was Ayatollah Khomeini. Ayatollah starts with an A-Y, Ayatollah. And so, for the record, pretty much every Iranian leader is called Ayatollah. That's the title. Khomeini is the name. So Ayatollah took power, and he put back all of the, more traditional and fundamentalist Muslim or Islamic beliefs, and undid all that westernization that he had done before. Ayatollah, not a good dude either, but there were a lot more people supporting him in Iran at the time than there were supporting the Shah. At the same time, the Shah got sick. He had cancer. And he had nowhere to go. If he stayed in Iran, he wouldn't be able to get medical treatment, and no other Arabic country would accept him because Iran, the people of Iran, wanted to try him for war crimes and kill him. And he was like, well, I'm going to die anyway of cancer. What do I do? Can I come to America? And Jimmy Carter was like, heck yeah, man, come to America. So we let this dictator, this old cancerous dictator, come to America, and we basically provide him shelter. And Iran is very angry. They're like, he didn't murder Americans, he murdered Iranians. And so we want him back here to answer for his crimes. And Jimmy Carter was like, no, I'm not sending him back there. You're just going to kill him. And I know that's what you're going to do. So no. So this made the Iranians hate America even more than they did before. They already didn't like us because we supported him and helped put him in power. Now we're protecting him. They're very angry. Now, we have our embassy in the capital of Iran, in the city of Tehran, Tehran. That's where the major university of Iran is, and that's where our embassy is. And in 1979, a group of student radicals were protesting outside of the embassy, and they ended up storming the embassy and taking 66 people hostage. So, Americans, okay? So they're Americans, they're Iranians who are there looking for American visas or trying to get American passports or anything like that, all taken hostage. People who, worked for our government living in Tehran at that time. So Carter pretty much has no idea what to do. Are they going to kill these people? Do we need to get them out? How do we get them out? Do we invade? What do we do? And Carter pretty much did nothing. And every day went by, and the hostages were still there. In total, the hostages were in Iran for 444 days, over a year. They were beaten, they were not fed properly, they were not given medical attention. Luckily, none of them were killed, which is very good. But they were very badly treated, and they had, severe, physical issues coming back, but a lot of trauma that I'm sure every one of those people had to deal with for the rest of their lives. And there are plenty still alive today. This wasn't that long ago, 1979. It wasn't that long ago. So they weren't released until 1981. And by then, it wasn't because of Jimmy Carter. It was because we had already elected a new president in November of 1980. That was Ronald Reagan. Before Reagan actually even was inaugurated as the next president in January, he immediately started negotiating and having his people negotiate with the hostage takers to get them released. And so they finally were released in the beginning of 1981. So ultimately, all of these things are really good examples of what Jimmy Carter was all about. He had always the best of intentions, but almost every time the worst of results.